Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask if the Home Secretary will make a statement on the prescription of Palestine action and public protest.
Mr. Jarvis.
Mr. Speaker, anyone who wishes to demonstrate about the humanitarian situation in Gaza or the actions of any government, including our own, has the absolute freedom to gather with others and voice their views, provided that they do so within the law. But supporting Palestine and supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation are not the same thing. The vitally important issue of Palestinian rights should not be co-opted by one organisation that has shown that it is willing to use violence in pursuit of its cause. The clear advice and intelligence given to the then Home Secretary earlier this year was that Palestine action satisfy the relevant tests in the Terrorism Act of 2000 and should be prescribed. Now, some of those holding placards in support of Palestine action may not know the extent of its activities. It has conducted an escalating campaign involving intimidation and sustained criminal damage, including to Britain's national security infrastructure. Some of its attacks have involved the use of weapons, resulting in alleged violence and serious injuries to individuals. Palestine Action's members have been charged with violent disorder, grievous bodily harm with intent, actual bodily harm, criminal damage and aggravated burglary. Charges that include, in the assessment of the Independent Crown Prosecution Service, a terrorism connection. Now, Mr. Speaker, these are not the actions of a legitimate protest group. And for a government to ignore expert security assessments, advice and recommendations would be highly irresponsible. Were there to be further serious attacks or injuries, there would rightly be questions asked about why action had not been taken. Now, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that a total of 890 arrests were made at a demonstration in central London on Saturday. Most of these were under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000 for displaying articles in support for Palestine action. 33 people were arrested for other offences, including 17 assaults on police officers. As the Metropolitan Police have pointed out, this was in stark contrast to the 20,000 people who peacefully marched and attended the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign demonstration. Now, demonstrations of this scale require a significant policing response. The new Home Secretary joined the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police on Saturday to observe the force's operations and express her backing for the officers working tirelessly to enforce our laws and maintain order. The fact that some officers were subjected to violence and abuse is utterly shameful. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is completely understandable that people rightly feel very strongly about the situation in Gaza, but supporting or being a member of a prescribed terrorist organisation is a criminal offence and will never be acceptable, regardless of the wider context. We all want the suffering in Gaza to end and the remaining hostages returned. We all want to see peace. So I say to the House that we must keep our focus squarely on achieving those aims and not on one harmful group that refuses to abide by our laws and threatens our public safety.
Can I just say, I don't know who's doing the speeches, but it is 3 minutes. Every time I'm going to crack down. In future, I will begin to stop ministers and shadow ministers don't keep the time. I've got to get backbenchers in. So does the Minister agree that we'll stick to time in the future? Thank you. I'm glad there's some acknowledgement. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 1,500 people now have been arrested because of concerns about prescription. There is clearly a problem with violence and intimidation in our politics, and we have to get this right because public confidence is also falling too. I am not here as a supporter or defender of Palestine action and their tactics. I condemn without hesitation abuse, intimidation and attacks on the police and any political opponent. The case for acting on the group itself was and is strong. We've seen a pattern of violence at their events, and they have not disassociated themselves from that violence. But we also see police and refugees being targeted for violence alongside those who want to protest about immigration matters. Banners that say, kill them all, let God sort them out. Neo-Nazi groups circling. And we cannot ignore the impact on policing on our streets because of these incidents. That this is just not sustainable for our police or our criminal justice system. There is a difference between people protesting using violence and people protesting the use of prescription. If we don't get right the response, if we continue to arrest those in that secondary category, the seriousness of the term terrorism risks losing its meaning, becoming diluted rather than strengthened. Prescription was supposed to be about stopping those inciting direct harm and violence. Going after somebody with a poster testing the boundaries of liberty, many of whom are clear they don't support Palestine action but feel strongly about Palestinian rights or free speech, confuses rather than clarifies the government's intention. People must be able to protest what is happening in Gaza, and the focus should be on what is happening in Palestine, not in Parliament Square. Mr. Speaker, I ask for this question because I think it is for us to act. Legislation on public order focuses on specific acts. Prescription orders target specific terrorist groups. Nothing sits in between this. Given this, I want to ask the Minister the following. What discussions has he had with the police about distinguishing between members of Palestine Action and people concerned with prescription itself? The offence of recklessly encouraging support of a prescribed group runs counter to that focus on criminality. If he won't abolish that offence, will he at least set out guidance to the CPS and the police about any public interest test in using it? The previous policing minister...
Order. Look, this is what happens. Please, you were told earlier, I granted the UQ because I thought it was important to you, and you were absolutely advised it was 2 minutes. I think you've now finished, or you're just about to. Okay.
I do apologise, Speaker, I was advised it was 3, but that's my fault. Look, terrorism is different from terrorising opponents, but both should be criminal offences. Will the Minister commit to a review of this section so that we can get it right for the sake of our democracy?
I believe Sean did correct it to say it was 2. So I don't want the department to be blamed. Okay, that's correct. Thank you. Right, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me say to the honourable member that I'm genuinely grateful for her bringing these issues to the House. These are important matters, and it's right that ministers are held accountable for them. Let me say to her first point that I'm sure the whole House will agree with the remarks that she made about violence and intimidation in our politics. They have absolutely no place. And I know that she will be aware that there's a significant body of work taking place across government, coordinated through the Defending Democracy Task Force, to ensure that all of our elected representatives are able to do their duty and represent their constituents without fear or favour. And that is something that this government takes very seriously indeed. She makes a number of points, and I'll struggle to respond to all of them. Let me just say something that I know that she will understand, that the police are operationally independent of government. And of course, we remain in very regular contact. But I do think it's important to actually take the opportunity to thank the police for the important work they do. They come under a huge amount of scrutiny, rightly so. But I think we saw this weekend an impeccable police operation where brave officers stood and did their duty, and 17 of them, at least, were allegedly assaulted in the line of duty. I think the final thing to say to her is around drawing the distinction, which she will well understand, about the absolute right that anybody in our country has to express their concern about the desperately difficult situation in the Middle East, and more specifically in Gaza. The ability to go to the streets and to join with others and express individual concern or collective concern about unfolding events, whether in this country or further afield, is an absolute cornerstone of our democracy. And this government would never do anything to get in the way of that. And I think it was interesting that tens of thousands of people took to the street this weekend and were able to express their concern in an entirely lawful way. She asked me about whether we're sort of seeking to review any of the elements within the Terrorism Act. I think it's worth pointing her to the comments that were published recently by Jonathan Hall, KC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, who said in a published article with regard to Palestine action, there is no way ordinary criminal law would be effective against funding, training and recruitment in tackling this group. The government have to ensure public safety, and that is what this government will always seek to do.
Shadow Home Secretary Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we, in common I hope with everyone in this House, fully support, unequivocally, the right to peaceful protest, including on issues concerning the Middle East, both the hostages who remain captive and civilians in Gaza, whose plight I know concerns us all. But in exercising that right to protest, violence is never acceptable. And Palestine Action have committed deliberate criminal damage against various premises. They've used a sledgehammer to attack a police officer, and they have deliberately sabotaged RAF planes. No matter how strongly people feel about an issue, and whatever the rights and wrongs of that issue, using violence to advance a political agenda is never acceptable. That is not how we do things in this country. We settle things through debate, and we settle things through election. Now, the Security Minister has given the House assurances about the necessity of this measure. I haven't been briefed or been offered a briefing on that, but I think the Security Minister commands widespread respect across the House, and members will take his assurances seriously. I would ask him to give an assurance that the police are taking all possible preventative action against Palestine Action where they may be planning future attacks against premises or future acts of violence, including using the offence of conspiracy to commit public nuisance, under which the police have quite wide-ranging powers. I would join the Security Minister in extending my thanks to the police for the difficult work they do keeping us safe. I would finally, Mr. Speaker, use this opportunity to express my support for a protest that took place on Sunday in Parliament Square, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism march, which I addressed. It was regrettable that neither the Home Secretary nor a senior government minister addressed that march, so could the Security Minister take this opportunity to express the government's resolve to combat anti-Semitism wherever it is found?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say that I'm very grateful to the Shadow Home Secretary for his remarks and for the tone of them. And in response to his final point, yes, let me absolutely take the opportunity on behalf of His Majesty's Government to state our absolute abhorrence against anti-Semitism wherever it rears its ugly head. And I hope he knows that this government will do everything that we possibly can to stand against the forces of racism wherever they seek to rear their ugly head. Now, I completely agree with him that violence is never acceptable in terms of pursuing a political agenda, and I'm very pleased that we're able to establish a consensus across this House in that regard. Let me just say to him, with regard to the point he made about briefings, of course, he knows that we'd be very happy to brief him. We did brief the Shadow Minister ahead of the prescription action back in July, but he knows I'd be very happy to brief him on Privy Council terms whenever he should wish. I'm also able to give him the assurances that he seeks about the work that the police are doing. He knows, as a former Home Office Minister, police are operationally independent, but I can absolutely give him that assurance that the police will be taking all necessary measures to guard against future attacks. And I'm very happy to speak to him about these matters further, but I'm grateful for his support for these matters today.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I understand it, the conviction of those simply displaying prescribed groups' names have been extremely rare unless there's been clear evidence of an intent to promote a group's more extreme actions. If this is the case, and as it's clear that the acts of protest and civil disobedience seen in recent days are not acts which would ordinarily form part of a case for prescription, why don't the police simply stop the arrests?
Minister. Sorry.
Well, I do want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the difficult job that the police do. And in my experience, both recently and over a longer period of time, I think the police have done an excellent job, often under very difficult circumstances. I do think it's important that we consider proportionality. These are operational judgments that have to be made by the police, often on the ground, often under pressure, under difficult circumstances. But I also do think it's important that we consider that we would not tolerate the kind of activity that we've seen in recent days and weeks from an organisation, for example, motivated by Islamist extremism, or an organisation motivated by an extreme right-wing ideology. And similarly, we cannot tolerate that activity from Palestine Action, and this government will support the police in doing the difficult job that we've asked them to do.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The right to peaceful protest is a cornerstone of a liberal democracy, but events over the weekends have set a dangerous precedent, risk having a chilling impact on free speech and legitimate protest in the UK. The arrest of 857 protesters under terror laws, following hundreds of arrests under the same powers last month, is deeply alarming. The Lib Dems warned that this would be exactly what happened when the Conservatives expanded terrorism powers in 2018. There's no doubt that those using violence, anti-Semitic abuse or hate speech must face the consequences, but these crimes are already covered by existing law. Mr Speaker, it cannot be right that simply displaying a placard in support of a prescribed organisation while peacefully protesting can result in a conviction and up to 6 months in prison. So will the Minister urgently review terrorism legislation, specifically as it is impacting the right to protest peacefully, to ensure it is proportionate and contains the nuance it so clearly needs?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to her, as I always am, for the sensible and reasonable tone in which she makes her remarks. But I have to say to her, I don't agree that the events of this weekend have had a chilling effect on our democracy. I think quite the opposite. Tens of thousands of people have come to London to exercise their absolute right to demonstrate about matters about which they are concerned. The overwhelming majority of people who came to London were able to do so in an entirely reasonable and lawful way. It is only a very tiny minority of people who haven't been able to do it in that way and have deliberately sought to get arrested. Now, she makes an entirely reasonable point to ask about necessity and proportionality and whether the government intends to review existing legislation. And I think that is an entirely reasonable point for her to raise. She's raised it previously, we've discussed it, and I know that her leader raised it over the course of the summer recess. Let me say to her that, of course, we look very carefully at legislation, but the government doesn't currently have any plans to amend the existing legislation, not least of in light of ongoing criminal proceedings relating to Palestine Action and the ongoing judicial review. It would not be appropriate to carry out a review at this time. We think that the UK's counter-terrorism legislation does strike the right balance between protecting national security and individual freedoms, including the right to the freedom of expression under Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights. She knows the high regard in which I hold Jonathan Hall, the independent reviewer. And she also knows that the legislative framework is subject to independent statutory oversight by the independent reviewer. The government will, of course, consider any recommendations that he seeks to make. I've advised the Honourable Lady previously to get in touch with her, and I know that I think that she has, and I know that she'll want to look very carefully at what he says about this.
Rivera.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those arrested were merely holding signs or wearing T-shirts and displaying general support for a group who don't come close to the loosest definition of terrorism. But meanwhile, political pundits and columnists seem free to discuss Palestine Action without fear of criminal prosecution. Whilst I don't think anyone should face arrest for doing so, it doesn't seem fair that people can get away with it as long as they're doing so in front of a TV camera. So can the Minister explain how the law is being applied, if it's being applied fairly, where people are allowed to show support for Palestine Action? Because it's clear that some people are being allowed to do it and not others.
I know the Honourable Lady has a very long-standing interest and concern in these matters. I can give her an absolute assurance that the law is being applied fairly. I would say to her, and I know that she will agree with this, that nobody is above the law. And I think it's important to think about how we would collectively seek to respond to those behaving in a similar way, but underpinned by very different causes. Extreme Islamist terrorism, extreme right-wing ideology. If people were demonstrating on behalf of those organisations in the same way that we've seen people demonstrating in support of Palestine Action, I think it absolutely would be the case that people would want the police to be acting in the way that they have seen them act over this weekend. I say to her again, the law is being applied firmly, nobody is above the law, and the police need to be able to ensure that they are able to enforce it without fear or favour, and that's what I think they did over the course of this weekend.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The burden for policing these protests is falling on certain forces more than others. We know from when we had the disorder last summer that that was the case as well. Can the Minister give some reassurance that the Home Office is providing the support that's needed to those forces to ensure that they can manage the protests, but also it does not distract from day-to-day policing?
I think, Chair, the Select Committee raises a very important point. Yes, I can give her the assurances that she seeks. She's right that recent activity has provided particular burdens on particular forces. The Home Secretary and I, and of course the Policing Minister and colleagues right across government, work very closely with the police, and we will ensure that they have got the necessary resources they do for the important job that they have to do.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last August, a police officer was hospitalised after being hit with a sledgehammer whilst responding to a Palestine action attack on a business near Bristol, a fact that was absent from the debate that we had when we voted to prescribe the organisation recently. The attackers had sledgehammers, axes, whips and other homemade weapons. Would the Minister agree that this crosses the line of any legitimate protest into terrorism?
Yes, I would.
Kit Moulton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that no one's above the law and that violence is never the answer, and I agree with him, and I know that he believes the law should be wielded with integrity. So when are we going to see prescription of violent settler groups in the West Bank, many of whom are perpetrating a reign of terror on innocent Palestinians in that part of the world, and who may be garnering support and raising funds in the United Kingdom?
Minister.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman is a very experienced member of this House and has served as a Minister in the Home Office. So I'm sorry to have to put my response to him in this way, but he will understand why I do so, that we never comment about matters relating to the future prescription. But the words that he's spoken, I know, will have been heard by colleagues in other government departments as well as my own. He makes these points with great consistency. He has raised them with me previously, but I know that he will understand that there is a very long-standing protocol across a number of governments that we don't talk about future prescription activity.
Lawrence Session-Lomy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response this afternoon. And I do concur with some of the comments raised by my colleague from Walthamstow in terms of people being arrested, including my constituents, some of whom were protesting peacefully. I just wanted to come back to the issue of frontline policing and the impact. As a Central London MP, I'm seeing resources from my local police being drawn away to deal with the protests. And my constituents want those frontline police officers. They want their issues around crime on their streets to be solved. So the Minister will understand the sheer scale of concern in terms of making sure the police locally are able to get to grips with that. So just coming back from the response to the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, can the Minister assure me that those ongoing discussions are happening with the police, including the Chair of the Met Police Federation, who was on the World at One today, to say that these protests are not sustainable?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to her because I think, as the Chair of the Select Committee did, she raises a very important point. She will absolutely understand the importance that this government attaches to the Safer Streets agenda, and we are working, and I can give her an assurance that we are working very closely with the Metropolitan Police and with other police forces right around the country to ensure that they have got the resources they need to police these kind of protests or this kind of activity alongside the other activities that they're required to police. The Home Secretary, the Policing Minister and I take these matters very seriously. We met with senior representatives of the Metropolitan Police just last week, but I give her an absolute assurance that we will make sure that police do have the necessary resources to do the job that we ask them to do.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the scale of arrests over the weekend and the Minister stating he has no intention to review legislation, will he commit instead to an independent review into the use of terrorism legislation against people peacefully protesting to see if it is actually fit for purpose?
Well, I'm grateful to her for a question. Hopefully she heard the response that I gave a moment ago about how it wouldn't be appropriate to get into a process of review at this particular moment because of ongoing legal proceedings. I do think that we are incredibly fortunate to have Jonathan Hall KC as the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. He's someone who brings a weight of authority and credibility to this process. And I know that he has particular views on this, and I would invite her and other members to look closely at what he said about it.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Right Honourable Member would agree with me that the continued mass arrests of peaceful protesters, many of whom are protesting about the prescription of Palestine action, but would not for a moment support the activities of Palestine action, is something that we should distinguish and something that we should be advising prosecutors and the police about. Not least because the furore around these arrests risks drowning out the rightful protests about the difficult situation in Palestine and Gaza that he himself has referred to.
Well, I think the Honourable Member does raise really important points. I mean, for clarity, it's an offence to display support for Palestine action, but it's not an offence to criticise the government's decision to prescribe. Some difficult judgments often have to be made by the police on the ground, but let me give her a categorical assurance that this government will do absolutely nothing to get in the way of somebody's absolute right to protest about a matter about which they are concerned. And in many respects, I think it was incredibly heartening to see tens of thousands of people take to the streets, express their concern, but do it in an entirely peaceful and lawful way. And I hope that that will long continue.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As I've indicated previously, I have my doubts about whether the terrorism label is most suited to a group which is certainly criminal, certainly violent, and arguably seditious in its attacks on the assets of our military. But I have a positive suggestion to make. Would the Minister undertake fully to brief the chairman and members of the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, which I used to chair but on which I now no longer serve, because if they were able to see information that he can't share publicly and to say to us that they were satisfied with the terrorism designation, I for one would find that reassuring.
Minister.
Well, I'm always very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman who speaks with a real wisdom about these matters. I can give him those assurances. We have been in contact with the committee that he used to chair. They consist of some incredibly experienced and wise parliamentarians, and we seek to take their counsel at every opportunity. So yes, we have engaged with them and will continue to do so about this and other matters.
Would have done. Steve Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst Palestine Action waged their campaign of intimidation and went about damaging military bases with very little impact itself in the Middle East, this week the government will host President Abbas and President Herzog for discussions on a more peaceful future for Palestinians and Israelis alike. I wonder if the Minister would agree with me that, unlike Palestine Action, this government is actually taking genuine and serious steps to support peace in the Middle East.
Well, I'm grateful to him for his comments, and I completely agree with them. I think that there is an absolute point of consensus in this place, and I hope much further afield, about the urgent need to secure peace in the Middle East. And this government, led by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary and colleagues in the FCDO, will do everything that we possibly can to support that important process.
Pete Wishart.
Say to the Minister that the optics of octogenarian priests being arrested alongside hundreds of peaceful protesters look absolutely awful for this government. But in Scotland, we only had 3 arrests over the weekend because Police Scotland seemed to deploy a much more conciliatory, community-based approach. So does he support operational independence across the UK? And if police forces feel it is in their interest to have different policing arrangements from the Metropolitan Police, he will support them and there will be no government interference in their operations.
Minister.
I'm grateful to him for his question today and for his engagement over the course of the summer. I can give him an absolute assurance that yes, of course, we believe in the absolute importance of the operational independence of the police, and they do have to make some very difficult judgments. But I hope that he also agrees with me that nobody should be above the law. There isn't an age limitation with regard to these particular offences, and the police have difficult judgments to make. But in the main, I think that they have acted proportionately and that they have acted without fear or favour in the best traditions of British policing.
Absaham Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend alone, almost 900 people were arrested, several of whom were from my constituency. The Terrorism Act wasn't brought in to arrest vicars, retired grandmothers and NHS consultants for holding a placard. Yet the police are now in the position where this is exactly what they are doing weekend after weekend. Will the Minister consider the views of international human rights experts like the UN Human Rights Commissioner, who has described the ban as disproportionate and unnecessary, and will he acknowledge our concerns that political decisions must be open to political challenge, otherwise we risk a massive loss of confidence in our democracy?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely agree about the point of political challenge. That's why we're here today, to debate the decision and the policing around it. I hope that she will understand that the government have, as we always seek to do, acted in good faith. The advice that the government received was clear and unambiguous. Palestine Action is concerned in terrorism. Its members have demonstrated a willingness or intention to conduct a serious violence against persons in pursuit of their cause. Under those particular circumstances, the government has a responsibility and a duty to act. She'll know also, and I've mentioned this previously, that the independent review of terrorism legislation has been widely quoted about his response to the actions that the government have taken. And he concluded in a recent article that there is no way that ordinary criminal law would have been effective against this organisation.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Does the Minister agree that whilst in this case proscription may be finely balanced, the law must be upheld whether you like it or not, and whoever you are and wherever you are? And does he share my concern, therefore, there does appear to be some regional disparity in the interpretation put on the law in this case, as evidenced by the differences in the rates at which people were arrested across this country at the weekend?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him, as I always am, for his question. I acknowledge the assessment that he made about the decision being finely balanced. I know that he would understand, should this or any government have taken a different approach, we would no doubt be here discussing and debating the particular reason that the government had decided not to prescribe. So these are difficult judgments, but under the circumstances that I've described, the Home Secretary did exactly the right thing in taking the decision that she did. In terms of his point about regional disparities, he will have heard the comment I made just a moment ago about the operational independence of the police. But if he sees particular incidences or occurrences that he thinks is not in the spirit of that, please would he write to me, and I'd be very happy to look at them.
Alexa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like so many people, myself included, looking at the famine in Gaza and the planned annexation of the West Bank with a sense of complete desperation and a lack of agency. People want to demonstrate that desperation through peaceful protest. Seeing the mass arrests of people holding placards is difficult for many of us. I understand the nature of prescription, meaning showing support is a criminal offence, but when the acts are peaceful and the cause so desperate, at the time of voting, the effect of arrest was not made clear to us. We must reflect again on the effects of prescription. When assessing whether to prescribe Palestine Action, to what extent the government take into account the rights to free expression and free association, including under Article 10 and 11 of the HCR, not of the organisation itself, but of the wider cohort who will be criminalised for expressing peaceful support for the prescribed organisation?
Of course, I agree with him in the point that he makes about peaceful protest. And I can give him an absolute assurance that the Home Secretary, in taking this or any decision, acts on advice and very carefully considers a range of different factors. He is right to talk about peaceful protest. There was peaceful protest taking place in London over the course of this weekend, and that was very good to see. But it was also the case that the particular demonstration where there were significant number of arrests. There were also 33 people arrested for separate offences, including 17 alleged assaults on police officers. None of us want to see that kind of violent activity, and we will work closely with the police to ensure that people do have the ability to protest in a peaceful way. That is a cornerstone of our democracy, but it is entirely unacceptable that anybody should seek to assault a police officer.
Bobby Dean.
Mr Speaker, now I hear the distinction that the Minister is attempting to make this afternoon, but the fact remains that almost 1,000 largely peaceful protesters were arrested in London this weekend. And I'm sure that when we look back on this, we're going to conclude it was not only a huge waste of police resources, but a chilling moment for free speech in this country. Now, given that the government seems so convinced that these people are associated with terrorism, will they commit to publishing data on how many and what proportion of those arrested will be actually charged with terrorism-related offences?
Minister.
Well, I can say to him, hopefully in a constructive way, the only distinction I'm seeking to make is between those who break the law and those that don't. And we saw a very interesting comparison over the course of this weekend. Tens of thousands of people came to protest and were able to do so, were able to protest their concerns about the terrible situation in Gaza without supporting a prescribed organisation. And there is, as I said in my earlier remarks, a big difference between being able to protest in support of a cause that is legitimately held, set against expressing support for a prescribed organisation, which is a criminal offence, and the police have an absolute duty to enforce the law, and that is what they did.
Andy MacDonald.
Mr Speaker, nobody's above the law, yet the Metropolitan Police reports that a total of 857 people were arrested under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act at the weekend, the vast majority for simply holding placards stating, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action." So can the Minister confirm whether the government has received any legal advice concerning the implications of hosting a visit by Israeli President Herzog in relation to the UK's Genocide Convention responsibilities, particularly given his recent record of stating that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza and personally signing artillery shells destined for use in Gaza? And will any visa application made by the Israeli President to visit the UK this week be rejected, or will he be subject to police investigation if he does arrive?
Minister.
I understand why the honourable gentleman has asked me the question that he has. I hope that he will understand. He's asking me about matters with which I don't have ministerial responsibility. So he will also understand that the government obviously receives a range of legal advice across a range of different departments. The purpose of this particular response today is to look at the issue of prescription and the recent protest activity. I can give him and the House an absolute assurance that this is a government that believes in upholding the law. This is a government that believes in the importance of international law, and we will work with our allies and partners to ensure that international law and domestic law is upheld.
Roberts.
On this day, 89 years ago, 3 founding members of Plaid Cymru handed themselves in after burning the RAF bombing school at Penaberth. Today, they and all their supporters would likely be branded terrorists for non-violent direct action. Lumping Palestine action with Maniacs Murder Club and Russian imperial movement was calculated, cynical and disproportionate. It has led to the arrest of hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters. What does he think will be the consequences now that his government looks more interested in silencing protest than maintaining policing by consent?
Minister.
I struggle to follow the logic of the Right Honourable Lady's question, given that tens of thousands of people were absolutely able to express their democratic right to protest over the course of this weekend. I'm sure she would have seen that, and I hope that she will understand that this government hasn't done anything that interferes with anybody's lawful right to express their concern about an issue. And just, Mr. Speaker, to pick up on one other point that she made, let me give her an absolute assurance. We didn't group the 3 prescribed organisations together for the reasons. No, she's completely mistaken. She's asked me a question. She might want to listen to the answer. There were 2 reasons why that decision was taken. Frankly, the first is because this is a government that has a busy legislative agenda, and we need to be efficient with precious parliamentary time. But perhaps the second and more important reason is this government doesn't look at the ideological origin of the threat. We will do what we need to do to keep the public safe, regardless of where the threat comes. That is the right approach. It is even-handed, and it was on that basis that we proceeded.
Sabler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent weeks, a number of my constituents in Stroud have been arrested. Many of them are over 70, and the whole situation seems to have become slightly ridiculous. Would he agree with me, actually, that prescribing here is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut?
Well, with great respect, I don't mean to be flippant. I think it's a rather unfortunate use of sledgehammer, given recent events. So, no, I don't agree with him. I think the actions of the government have been necessary and proportionate for the reasons that I've explained earlier on. And I do worry that there are a number of people who seek to express support for an organisation who do not fully understand the activities that that organisation has engaged in recent times.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Justice Chamberlain granted the judicial review on the basis that the Home Secretary had not consulted Palestine Action before prescribing it. The judge ruled it was reasonably arguable that there was a duty to consult Palestine Action before prescribing it, as reported in The Guardian. If organisations meet a high standard and a high threshold for prescription under the Terrorism Act, why should there be a duty to consult an organisation before prescribing it?
Minister?
Well, I hope that he understands that given that there are ongoing legal proceedings, it would be completely inappropriate for me to comment about any legal rulings or judgments that have been made. But I can give him an assurance that in terms of making the decision, all of the necessary legal and expert advice was very, very carefully considered. There is a formal legal process that enables any organisation that is prescribed to seek a legal right to redress. The government is very supportive of any organisation who's been prescribed pursuing a legal avenue of appeal. That is their right to do so, and this government would never get in the way of that legal right.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that this is not a case of people's democratic rights to protest being curtailed? Because the democratically elected government and parliament have legislated, members have prescribed Palestine Action lawfully, and now police enforce the law free from political interference. The law is clear, people are no longer allowed to support this organisation, and to do so risks lawful arrest. Would he agree, furthermore, that there's nothing to stop people protesting in support of the Palestinians or against this Israeli government, as long as they do so peacefully and within the law?
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I completely agree with all of the points that he has made. And he knows, and I knows, and I'm sure the House knows, that had the government taken a different decision, I would be stood here at the dispatch box seeking to justify that particular decision as well.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Minister to reflect for a moment? This is the largest number of people arrested ever since the Terrorism Act 2000 came into force. Those people that were protesting on Saturday were protesting at the horror of the genocide in Gaza and British complicity of it with arms sales and military cooperation and support. They are deeply concerned about civil liberties in our society and feel that the legislation rushed through this Parliament actually damages their right to civil, peaceful protest within our society. The Minister knows that the weight of history is against him. He knows that at some point the government is going to have to review this legislation, otherwise this situation will simply get worse and worse. Can he not just bring himself to say now they're going to look at it again, review the whole situation again, and not prescribe peaceful protest within our society, but accept we have a history behind us that brought us all here, which is built on protest and dissent?
Minister.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman has been a member of this House for a very, very long time, so he will know that this legislation wasn't rushed through Parliament. It came through Parliament in the same way that other prescription actions have come through over many, many years. Let me seek perhaps 2 points of consensus. The first is around freedom of speech. I don't know what he was up to at the weekend. I have a sneaking suspicion he may have been on the streets of London, and good luck to him. It is his absolute democratic right to protest in the way that he is well known for doing so. This government hasn't done anything to stand in the way of him and his colleagues to do that. But let me just say one other thing to him, because although he and I may disagree on many things, I hope, as supporters of the trade union movement, we do agree on the importance of safety of people in the workplace. So he asked me to consider something. Perhaps I'd ask him to consider the importance of safeguarding people's safety and security in the workforce. Not something the organisation we're discussing today has given much consideration to.
Jim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of people have now been arrested on terror offences, facing up to 14 years imprisonment for no more than peacefully holding a placard. Most are elderly, many are healthcare workers, priests and ordinary working people, all prepared to risk severe punishment for doing what our government has failed to do. The prescription of Palestine action is an authoritarian attack on the rights to protest. It's absurd, it's unworkable and unsustainable. So will the Minister and the new Home Secretary consider the government's position?
Minister.
Well, what this government will do, what the new Home Secretary will do, is everything that is necessary and proportionate.
It's okay. Carry on, sorry. The member was stood up reading the phone rather than sitting down over it. Better still in reading a question, but it doesn't matter, he can't do that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government, this Home Secretary, will do everything that is necessary and proportionate to keep the public safe. These are difficult judgments that require very careful consideration. Very careful consideration was given to the decision that was taken, and it was motivated by a very strong desire and a responsibility to keep the public safe.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank and congratulate the police for arresting successfully so many hundreds of people who broke the law and shockingly supported a prescribed terror group? And does the Minister expect them to be charged and prosecuted to ensure a proper deterrent against supporting a prescribed terror group?
Minister.
Well, let me first of all join with him in thanking the police for the important work that they do. It is absolutely shameful that there were 17 assaults on members of the police doing their job in London this weekend. That is totally unacceptable and rather undermines the credibility of those who seek to say that these are entirely peaceful protests. With regard to his other point, I hope that you will understand that these are matters for the Crown Prosecution Service which are independent of government. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on them, but I share the concerns that he's expressed.
David Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I abhor the methods of Palestine Action and indeed any violence taken in the order of protest. But at the same time, 4 groups have been deprescribed in the last 20 years, as I understand it. And I'm sure that the aim is for all banned groups to de-escalate and become legitimate protesting groups. So can I ask the Minister, what steps or evidence would be required for Palestine Action to be deprescribed in the future?
Minister. I'm grateful to him for his thoughtful and sensible question. There is a formal legal process that is to be followed. And as I've said in response to an earlier question, the government completely understands that any organisation that is prescribed has an absolute legal right to contest that decision. This government will not stand in the way of that legal process. We will respond in a reasonable and responsible way. There is a process that is underway in terms of a legal appeal. That will run its course, and then we'll have a legal ruling. But the government will, of course, abide by that.
Caroline Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many members of my community were arrested in London on Saturday, including a senior priest, an elderly Jewish man, a teacher who has spent years with Gazan children and has witnessed the horror of seeing them killed by Israeli troops over the last couple of years. These people are not terrorists. While I'm sure everybody in the House would agree that anybody attacking serving police officers in the streets deserves to be arrested, does the Minister accept that the use of counter-terror powers is wholly disproportionate to the peaceful action these people were taken by simply holding signs and sets a dangerous precedent for free speech?
Minister.
I don't accept her critique about the precedent with regard to free speech for the reasons that I've already referenced and the tens of thousands of people who were on the streets of London this weekend expressing their free speech. The police have difficult judgments to make. I don't accept our analysis that this wasn't proportionate. The government has an absolute responsibility to act when the evidence suggests that we need to take decisions in order to secure the public safety. That's what the government has done. We stand by that decision and we'll work with the police to ensure that people obey the law. And where they don't, regardless of their age or their professional background, there have to be, I'm afraid, consequences.
Brenda Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of those arrested over the weekend for simply holding placards were older and disabled citizens and human rights activists who can hardly be described as terrorists. Considering that the UN Human Rights Chief has warned that prescription dangerously conflates protest with terrorism, does the Minister at least accept that we run some risk of suppressing protest and dissent, through which we obtained many of our freedoms that we enjoy today?
Minister. I really don't think that that is the case. At every stage of these proceedings, the government has been absolutely clear about the important right, the cornerstone of our democracy, for people to protest about matters about which they are concerned. This government hasn't done anything to get in the way or prevent people from doing that. We saw that this weekend. Tens of thousands of people having their say. They were able to do so in a way that was lawful and didn't require them to be arrested because they hadn't broken the law. I don't accept the analysis that some have offered that this has a chilling effect on free speech. Quite the opposite. I think it absolutely demonstrates that people can come and demonstrate in a lawful way and the police will respond in an appropriate manner.
Sarah Sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a shame that the Home Secretary couldn't come today to defend her government. Over 1,600 people have been arrested since this Labour government prescribed a non-violent direct action group for the first time in British history. This includes elderly people, disabled people, priests, NHS workers and the children of Holocaust survivors. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has condemned this prescription as disproportionate, unnecessary and warning it risks creating a further chilling effect. So will the Minister finally admit that his government got it wrong, that they have threatened and undermined our free speech and right to protest, and that they will review and immediately lift this ban?
Well, firstly, the Home Secretary is meeting with our Five Eyes allies who are here for the five-country ministerial. That is incredibly important work, securing our alliances with our United States, Canadian, Australian and New Zealand allies. These are important partnerships that this government values and that this Home Secretary is investing in almost on her first full day in office. In terms of the other points that she seeks to raise, the Honourable Lady has an absolute right, as everybody does, to protest in a lawful way. There is nothing that this government has done to prevent her or anybody else from doing that. What this government has done is ensure that we are best placed to protect the public. I'm sorry that she doesn't agree that is her absolute right, but I maintain the support for freedom of speech. It is a cornerstone of our democracy, and this government will always enable people to have their say.
Rachel Maskell. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I absolutely do condemn any action of violence taken against the public or indeed the police. However, I have written to the former Home Secretary twice on this matter because many legislators here today have yet to see the evidence which satisfies us about the proportionality of the application of the prescription of Palestine action and indeed the public's right to protest and freedom of speech and the balance of which government holds that. If I could encourage him to review this law, not least because it has, according to what the government wants, a contrary impact because, of course, the more arrests, the more it's drawing attention to Palestine action.
Let me say, I entirely understand why the Honourable Lady might wish to raise concerns in the way that she has. And I think she actually made an important point about evidence. I can give her an assurance that all of the evidence that we are able to put into the public domain, we have done so. I hope that she will understand that there are strict limitations around some of the things that we are able to say for a variety of reasons, not least there are ongoing police investigations and ongoing criminal proceedings. That does limit the ability of government ministers to talk about this issue. But within those constraints, we've tried to be as clear as we possibly can about the reasons for this decision. And on a number of occasions, the previous Home Secretary and myself have laid out the reasons why we took this decision.
I urge the Minister to be a bit more succinct in his response. Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of peaceful protesters have been arrested this weekend in the name of national security. But in what way does a peaceful protester's tactic of holding a banner compromise national security? And if the aim of national security is to fundamentally ensure that we can live in a free society where our democratic freedoms are protected, can the Minister not see that the mass arrest of peaceful protesters is an authoritarian measure that undermines these freedoms and does not protect them?
Look, I completely acknowledge that the concerns that the Honourable Member has expressed are entirely genuine and well-meaning. I hope that he understands the importance that we attach to the rule of law. And we don't think that people should be accepted from the rule of law because they are of a particular age or because they have a disability or because they have a particular professional background. That would be entirely unfair. Nobody is above the law. The police have a difficult job to do in order to police these particular protests. I would just also gently say to him that the protests that we saw over the weekend in this regard were not entirely peaceful. 33 arrests, including 17 for assaults on police officers. I hope that none of us want to see that kind of activity in our capital or anywhere else for that matter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answers today, and I fully agree there can be no place for violence in our politics. But would the Minister accept that elderly retired priests and disabled veterans would not be protesting in the way that they are if they genuinely believed that Palestine Action was a similar organisation to ISIS or Al-Qaeda? And can he provide any additional guidance or advice on how members of the public can legitimately protest against the prescription of this organisation?
Minister.
Look, firstly, let me say to him that the government, and certainly not myself, are seeking to make the comparison that he has offered. But what we do believe is that people should follow the law. And it is a criminal offence to seek to support a prescribed group. So the police are doing the job of ensuring that the law is enforced. I do, again, make the comparison that if it were people protesting about other organisations, about extreme right-wing ideological Islamist organisations, then I think certain people, certain commentators, not in this place but outside of it, would seek to view this matter in a different way. We have to be even-handed and fair, and that is what we have sought to be.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Nobody would support the violent actions of some of the people in Palestine Action, of course. But the number of arrests is placing a huge pressure on our police. The demographic of those arrested is clearly absurd. The nature of what they're doing is holding a placard in response to the horrors that they're seeing on their televisions, and we're all in this House seeing those horrors. The previous Home Secretary says that many of the people who support this group do not know the nature of the more violent elements of it. Therefore, given the apparent imbalance of what we're seeing here, is the Minister not concerned that this creates a dangerous precedent when they're actually trying to enforce against people who are actually terrorists and have malign intent on our streets in future?
Minister.
As I said previously, I understand the concerns that are being expressed. Where he refers to somebody holding a placard, they are holding a placard that expresses support for a prescribed organisation, and that is a criminal offence. I do think, and I refer to the answer I gave just a moment ago, that the government is limited in terms of the detail that it can provide about the activities of Palestine Action for the reasons that I've already explained. I think if people who were considering seeking to protest and were considering seeking to provide their support for this prescribed organisation, I would just invite them to look very carefully at what that organisation has been engaged in. There has been significant reporting about some of those activities, and that might focus the minds of those who are seeking to support them in the future.
Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of the over 1,000 people that have been arrested, included blind veterans, elderly people, NHS workers, and even children of Holocaust survivors. Yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is intent on aiding and abetting Israeli firms. 51 of them who are going to be exhibiting in London this week at the Arms Fair, alongside rolling out the carpet stained with the children of Gaza, children's blood, for the President of Israel. So why are non-violent protesters being treated with greater punishment than a government bombing and starving millions of children? And would he agree with me that if there was real justice, the government would arrest Israeli leadership and send them to the ICC?
Yeah. Well, I hope very much that there is consensus across this House about the desperate situation in Gaza and the Middle East. And I hope that he will understand that this government will do everything that it can to work with partners and with allies to seek to bring a resolution to that desperate situation. He referenced the age of protesters. I just say to him that the law has to be applied fairly and universally. And therefore, if someone is of a particular age, that doesn't enable them to break the law in the way that it wouldn't enable someone of a younger age to do.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With over 800 people arrested this weekend, prescribing Palestine action clearly has not worked as intended. Will the government urgently review our terrorism legislation to ensure those who legitimately protest in favour of the Palestinian cause are not treated as terrorists for simply wearing a T-shirt or holding a placard?
Minister.
Well, I would refer him to the remarks that have been published recently by the Independent Reviewer for Terrorism Legislation.
Manuela Pascala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister tell me what safeguards, if any, are in place to ensure terrorism powers are not misused against people exercising their democratic right to protest peacefully against proscription, including elderly vicars holding placards?
Well, I think it's an entirely fair challenge. I mean, I would say to her that that's precisely why we have Jonathan Hall, KC, the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation. So he is somebody who is expert in this field, entirely independent from government, and looks at these matters very closely. I think that there is respect for him across the House. Certainly on behalf of the government, we hugely value his opinion, and I would ask her to look carefully about what he said with regard to these matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1,600 individuals, mainly senior citizens, arrested. The Minister will understand that this is not just a big operation, it's taxpayers' money, millions of pounds being spent on arrests, no doubt millions of pounds in legal aid if people are prosecuted in our court system. So will the Minister release the legal advice upon which this prescription took place so that the public can see whether the taxpayer money is being effectively used?
Well, there is a process in place where the Home Secretary makes decisions with regard to prescription. And as part of that process, of course, she will consider legal advice, but advice from experts right across government and from law enforcement. I can give him an assurance that these are decisions that are not taken lightly. No government, no Home Secretary would seek to take these decisions lightly, and the last Home Secretary certainly did not.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our free speech is protected under the European Convention on Human Rights, and we should view with great suspicion anybody who would remove the United Kingdom's signature from that convention. This government's prescription of Palestine action has led to the arrest of over 1,000 peaceful protesters, another assault on freedom of expression. I urge the government to review these powers, which also risk undermining our anti-terrorism laws.
Minister.
Well, he will have heard the response that I've given to the questions on that specific point earlier on in these exchanges. I would also just gently say to him that there were 17 police officers who were assaulted over the weekend, and whilst I completely understand why people will want to refer to non-violent protest, and I completely accept that the majority of people were behaving in a non-violent way, I hope that he and others will join with me in absolutely condemning any attack that took place over the course of the weekend on the police.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for all of his answers? And I was and am pleased to see steps been taken to ensure that those protesters who were outside the realms of peaceful protesters and who were demonstrating support for a prescribed organisation were dealt with in terms that line up to the law. Palestine Action's illegal street protests are impacting on police ability to do their normal jobs. Does the Minister believe that there are enough police officers to deal with more of these scenarios, and how does government ensure that policing on the ground in communities is not sacrificed to police these protests? Thank you.
Mr. Jarvis.
It's an important point that the Honourable Gentleman makes. I can give him an absolute assurance that we work very closely with the police to ensure that they've got the resources that they need and the necessary legislative framework in order to do their difficult job. But it is important, as he will understand from his own part of the world, that the police are able to enforce the law without fear or favour. I do think it is worth pointing out that the police do work very closely with organisers each week to facilitate safe, lawful protests, and I know that they will continue to do so. Hundreds of thousands of people have been able to make sure that their voices are heard, while only a very tiny majority have been arrested for breaking the law.
That concludes the statement on Palestine Action. We will now be moving on to the second urgent question, and I call Sir David Davis.